going to get that big guy in Salt Lake to do it, the one that eats a lot. And he went, the one that wears a bow tie or doesn't? And he said, the one that doesn't. And he's like, okay, good, that's Paul. So we'll let him know that after we interview with him. I wish I had known this after the fact, or before the fact. My negotiating skills would have been greatly enhanced. But I moved my family to Washington, D.C. Disappointed I didn't get to meet the man until I walked into a boardroom a few days later, and there he was. And I spent the next 3 years working with Jack Welch, building his online MBA program, visiting with him in his apartments in Manhattan, all the way to his incredible home in Florida, to learning from one of the greatest leaders to ever do it. I learned about who he was from him, not from the media, and then I supplemented with the media, which I'm really glad I did it that direction. The media has a really interesting perspective on Jack, not all unfounded, okay? But it was a great opportunity to build a relationship with Jack. Then a couple years ago, my father called, and I let him know I was thinking about moving on to the next chapter of life, and he jumped on that immediately. Said, in fact, I was just looking for a new business partner. It's time to move this into position to move me into retirement eventually, to be able to create an empire that we have built here. And after about 8 weeks of negotiations and campaigning on his part, I agreed. The reason was I cut my teeth on the principles that we teach at the Og Mandino group. It is something that I've employed in every profession that I've had, every position that I've worked in has been built on the principles of what we teach that start with connection with people and being able to use our minds constructively, how to be present in the now and not as a cliche, but how to actually do it, how to understand our systemic thoughts and our disciplined thinking, how to find joy in the journey, and then how to heal our self-esteem, an incredibly underrated principle. And it was a no-brainer to come here and to work with my father, with being the operative word. I refused to work for him. That didn't work out years ago. It wouldn't work out now. Okay, a few people giggling that have probably experienced the same thing. So tonight I've been asked to talk about relationships, which is everything. Interestingly enough, the core of relationships, the word itself is real. To be real is an opportunity to build a relationship. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to be real. We're going to talk about where to start when it comes to relationships. The best place to focus first. I want to uncover some of the major challenges, two of them in particular, that can create major hassle, unnecessary hassle in building relationships. And then lastly, how to take those relationships to create deeper and lasting relationships. Now, for the most part, this is going to be wide open interpretation. Probably more business relationships, friends, personal relationships, and then we'll finish off with a few things about what I would consider one of the ultimate relationships, and that is a committed companionship, whether married or not, a committed companionship, period. So, where to start? Well, it starts in the same place that our company started. Now, it started about 400 years ago with Galileo Galilei, okay? When he decided to challenge the idea of our finite understanding. He started to understand that there are certain things out there that we don't get. And he started questioning infinity, which is a concept that we're all very aware of at this point, but don't necessarily understand at a deep level, and started to wonder what were the things that were beyond our current finite boundaries in life, which then led to the concept of infinitudes, which was then substantiated by George Cantor, who created Cantor's transfinite calculus to substantiate Galileo's philosophies about infinity and actually bring mathematical quantification to the value of infinity. And then we move into Robert Hartman. Robert Hartman was born during World War I and created axiological science. He watched the rise of the Third Reich and asked himself in awe of how they were so good, in his words, at organizing evil. And why is the world so poor at organizing good? And he wanted to understand that. And using the concept of infinitudes from Galileo, using Cantor's transfinite calculus, he created axiological science for one single purpose, and that was to measure our thoughts, how we think, finding the core of who we are and how we show up, more importantly, being at the level of our thought processes. Our thoughts impact every facet of our lives, everything. From the results that we create, the decisions that we make, the relationships that we build. start with our thoughts. That's why our company, I would say, started 400 years ago. Now, you don't need to remember Galileo, infinitudes, Cantor's transfinite calculus, or any of that. I was just saying it to impress you. Okay? What you will want to remember is that our thoughts are what either propel us into success or hold us back in a torturous cycle of mediocrity. And understanding those unlocks everything, whether it's relationships, business plans, connections, deals, negotiations, systems, strategies, everything. They all come down to the execution of human beings, the connection, the relationships, our thoughts. Let's talk a little bit about what we discovered because of the pioneering of people like Galileo and Dr. Hartman. We discovered that there are three primary dimensions that we think about life on and that we consider relationships around. The first is intrinsic, which is infinite, which is something that is, we would call a non-denumerable infinite, meaning it goes on forever and any section of it goes on forever. Then we have extrinsic, which are things that can be comparable, contrastable. They're our stuff, what we look like, our talents and abilities. Then finally, we have systemic thoughts. Now, these are very interesting and tricky thoughts. We'll talk more about them when we get into the challenges part, because these are all or nothing, right or wrong, black or white, yes or no. There is no compromise when it comes to systemic thoughts because they only exist in our mind. They're not actually tangible things. They're not things of pricelessness that are beyond worth, like intrinsic values. They're systemic, like rules, laws, policies. They don't actually exist except for here, whether it's the enforcement of these or the understanding of them. So, what did Dr. Hartman want to do? He wanted to measure these three dimensions, because within these creates a complex matrix of 36 specific thought processes that don't make you who you are. They either magnify who you are or they sabotage who you are. Because we don't measure your personality. We don't measure your behavior. We measure your thought processes. Thank you to Dr. Hartman. Because of his science, we were able to develop a tool that in 10 minutes, which is perfect for my ADD and the microwave society that we live in today, 10 minutes with no questions to answer, we can measure completely objectively and without your ability to manipulate it, which won't make sense until you actually experience it, an objective analysis of your thought processes as accurately as a thermometer measures the temperature. We start there because once we can understand what the real issues are, we can start to build real relationships. Because we found, as we started to measure these things, the challenge wasn't so much in people's empathy, it wasn't in their compassion, it wasn't in their ability to be able to relate. It was all the noise that was going on that was creating challenges for them to show up as their true selves, that we could cognitively understand. It makes sense. Because one of the greatest gifts we have as human beings is the gift of metacognition. That means we can step back from all that noise. We can step back from ourselves and we can look at our lives and imagine possibilities and replay scenarios and create worst case scenarios and fantasize about how incredible things could be if. We can do all these things. We're the only creatures on earth that can do that. And it's one of the reasons why we can override unhealthy habits of thinking. I was on my way here today. Someone happened to cut me off. If we were not metacognitive, if we could not override our thought processes, that person would be dead. Okay? My gas pedal would have been slammed. No cost of insurance would have mattered at the time. Okay? It would have been over. And for that split second, I immediately stepped back and overridden that thought. Otherwise, we'd all be felons without this gift. Okay? However, there are some thought processes that are much more deeply ingrained, that have become habit. And as Og taught us so profoundly back in 1968, and the neuroscience has substantiated it since then, it's amazing, that we are slaves to our habits. That our habits will dictate the quality of our relationships. Our habits will dictate the quality of our lives and our success and our failure. And that is going to be the source of our thoughts to be able to be real, to be able to build relationships. So, Being able to understand these things at a very specific level is essential to what we do in our company. Because we were founded in 2000, we spent the first few years just teaching principles. Here's how you create a great relationship. Here's how you create greater success. In fact, the program was called Og Mandino's Keys to Success. And cognitively, it all made sense, but it was very similar to everything else that's out there. You read The Greatest Salesman in the World, and until you do it as Og prescribed, you have a difficult time understanding the depth of what's available to you there and the way that it impacts your thoughts. It's kind of a blanket approach, as he puts it out there, and reading them 3 times a day for 30 days, where it starts to seep into your other mind, as he talks about. And we were sharing these principles and trying to make them bite-sized and trying to allow them to seep in, but we didn't understand what was really going on until we saw measurement, until we found an opportunity to be able to find out where people really are, where we really live. And one of the greatest discoveries we made was that nothing is as it seems. We're living in the matrix. We're all plugged in, thinking that everyone is doing okay, everyone's financially okay, everyone's great, everyone that's here tonight is in a great mood and happy to be here and have nothing going on at home and nothing going on in their businesses, and they can't wait for 2016 because it's just going to be a continuation of how incredible 2015 was. Probably not. We spend a lot of time wishing that things were different. We spend a lot of time metacognitively fantasizing about the way we wish life could be. And we don't want to step into an engagement with someone and have to intuitively navigate where we think they might really be. We want to know immediately. And that's why we created the assessment. That's why we created a way for measurement, to be able to get to those issues right away. And that is my recommendation to you on where to start. Where do you want to start to build relationships? Start there. Start with you. And not start with you from a self-help, comical, cliche kind of way. We're talking about actually being able to understand you. Albert Einstein said the mind cannot solve a problem that it created itself. You need a tool to show you where some of the problems, so to speak, may be, where some of the challenges are, and ultimately some of the greatest strengths that you aren't utilizing yet. And it can start there with that assessment. Now, I just so happen to be lucky enough to have one of my top certified coaches and business partners here in the room. His name's Ken Sherrar. Okay? Ken is brought a wealth of experience and ability to the table when we met. He was looking for something to give some more teeth to what he was doing, and also related to some of that challenge of needing to intuitively navigate a client rather than being able to spend most of the engagement right with the real issues and where they can go from there. Bringing a tremendous expertise to life and business, and especially leadership itself. My recommendation to you would be to take advantage of someone here in your own circle to be able to dive into some of these measurements. Very able, very capable, certified to use this tool. And we've already talked, very willing to serve this group. And I'm here to support that. So in where to start with you. Start with your thoughts. Find out what's really going on and do it right there. coachic.com/Ken. Simple as that. Or if you just go to coachic.com, go to the drop-down menu and pick Ken Sherrar. Because that'll be an opportunity for you to be able to get some extended services that aren't necessarily available right up front to the public, because he's right here in your organization. Take advantage of that. He's ready to serve. I asked for his permission, and there's no hesitation to be able to provide that opportunity to each of you. So I would start there. Let's talk about the connecting with people checklist. Okay? These are the tools and the foundations for what you're going to want to understand to connect with people, which is ultimately building relationships at a completely different level. 1, agape love. This is everything. This is what Og called the greatest secret to success in all ventures. Everything, completely. This is where you want to start. In any relationship you have, business or personal, agape love should be your North Star directing everything that you do in that relationship, everything that you're trying to become and everything that you're trying to build and create. We'll talk more about that in a second. You'll want to understand your secret desires and your real intentions. This can be challenging because we are masterful at rationalizing and justifying everything. And being real with yourself is the ultimate unlocked door to creating success and being real with others and building those relationships. If you're not real with you, it's impossible to be real with them. So we'll talk a little bit more about secret desires and real intentions. And then we'll finish things off with intrinsic validation, the actual principles and steps that we've used to break down the steps for connecting with people, for getting out of your own way, for becoming a listener unlike anyone else is talking about. And if you just listen tonight, you'll get so far in terms of improving your ability to connect. But the ultimate goal is habit, to not just intrinsically validate, but to become an intrinsic validator. And to do that, it requires agape love. It requires an incredible level of awareness of yourself and others, and understanding your own thought processes to be able to bring that all together. So let's talk about agape love. Now, in our language, in the English language, there's only one word, love. That's it. However, the Greeks were a little smarter than us. They had 4 words for love, and the greatest of which was agape love. You had brotherly love, you had maternal love, you had romantic love, and then you had agape love, which is roughly translated in Greek as a heightened sense of awareness. Awareness being the key, the operative. Because when we hear love, we can think gushy and fluffy and soft, and that's really not what this is about. This is about precision and clarity. Being able to actually see you for who you are. Not free from my own bias, my own prejudice, my own noise. Being able to be aware of you and being able to be aware of myself on a completely different level. It's not a matter of giving excuses. It's not a matter of finding reasons for people's mediocrity and for their challenges and being sympathetic. It is a matter of awareness and clarity. Agape love comes from understanding that noise that's going on in our heads and understanding where some of the pressure points are, where we may be valuing people out of the proper order of things. I mentioned the 3 dimensions of thought that we have: intrinsic, extrinsic, systemic. What's interesting about Dr. Hartman's discoveries is when they're in line, that is when harmony is achieved. That is when good can be organized. That is when success is achieved on all levels. Success sometimes can be very tunnel vision. And oftentimes when it is, you don't find peace of mind, or you don't want the success that you were after when you get there. We're talking about total success. It's one of the reasons why when Og wrote the scrolls, he said right there in scroll 1, these principles are to teach you to prevent failure, not necessarily to create success. It's not necessarily a sexy selling statement. Learn how to prevent failure. No one wants to buy that pill. They want success, but success is nothing more than a state of mind. However, it's not just a state of mind. The natural outcome when you have the proper state of mind is that you create what you might have thought of success as before. Better relationships, lasting relationships, better businesses, better plans, better strategies, better opportunities. Agape love is an essential foundational element to doing that. Being able to see other people clearly, to notice things that no one else may notice. Secret desires and real intentions. This is a tough one, okay? Especially as we found over the 15 years working with entrepreneurs. There are a lot of people out there who want to give back. It makes sense. It sounds good. There's a lot of reasons for doing what we do, but there are basically 2 that it comes down to. We can choose to engage, or we can choose to escape. Now the challenge is, we feel like both are going to get us to our goal. And yet one sounds like this: I am here, present, completely present and available for you, to serve, to offer value, to engage in the business or the task or the person. Escaping tries to do those things, but it's only thinking about the result, what I'm going to get from it, why am I doing this, the means to an end. And if oftentimes it's, I want financial freedom so I don't have to worry about money anymore. I want to be able to build enough relationships so I don't have to have relationships anymore. You know, it sounds a little more like I wish I had enough money to buy an island and tell the world to go to hell. But right now, we want a network. Okay? And that's not an indictment to anyone here. There are just things we need to check in with ourselves on. We want to understand what are our secret desires and real intentions right now, because they change every day. There's the bigger why, and that's somehow easier to manage. My big why is fill in the blank. My kids, my family, whatever it is. Okay? whatever the big why is, can be a little more easy to manage than where you're at right now. Right before you came to this event, what were you thinking about? What was the reason you showed up? What were you hoping would happen? What were you wishing wasn't going to happen? Whatever the case is, that awareness piece of understanding where you're really at will allow you to be far more real and to be far more real with others. Because the last thing you want to do is show up trying to build a relationship when you're pretending to care. And you may care in the macro scope of things, but we're talking about right then and there. How aware of your secret desires and real intentions are you? Do you really want to connect, embrace, and serve? Or are you hoping to get a business deal to up the bottom line the next year? What is your secret desire and real intention? Because it's not that any of those things are not worthy of your attention or to be desired. They are, but we want to stay in harmony. We were talking about things being in the right order. Intrinsic values are the most important there are. They're also the most powerful thoughts that we have when they're intrinsically charged. Then extrinsic, then systemic. Where we run into challenges in our life and what our assessment measures is when we've taken a systemic value and made it more important than an extrinsic or an intrinsic one. Or when we've taken an extrinsic value and made it more important than an intrinsic one, because all of it is important, but it's making sure that it's in the proper order of value. Wanting to have a successful business, wanting to make a business deal is important, okay? It's what allows us to live and to eat. But if it is more important than the human being in front of you, it's an opportunity to be real about that secret desire and that real intention, because otherwise it's going to drift back into the noise and continue to camouflage itself with all the justification and rationalization that we make through our lives. So be aware of your secret desires and real intentions and find an opportunity to expose them. A journal can be a powerful place to do this, by the way. A confidant, someone that you can speak openly about what's real to you, where you're really at, and not being afraid or shameful to admit where you're really at, because that can be a powerful step to be able to move forward into the proper values and proper clear perspective of things, of where you're trying to head. Let's talk about two major challenges to relationships. As we show up present and available, and we're there for the right reasons, oftentimes, and we know this, because how many of you are entrepreneurial? How many of you have a difficult time getting your mind to shut up? Okay. Statistically, we know if you fall into any of those categories, that you probably have an over-focused, what we call an analytical measurement. It's in disciplined thinking, okay? It's a tremendous gift to be able to think that effortlessly. It says obsessively in the assessment, but it sounds a little nicer to say effortlessly. And when you think that effortlessly, you can come up with new ideas constantly. You're thinking of new and better ways to do things. You can solve problems quickly. You can see where the problems may be quickly. You get frustrated with other people because they don't have what you would call common sense. It goes on and on and on, but it also creates some other challenges, okay? Now, one of them is that we can get stuck in victimhood, what we call it. Whether it's keeping score, whether it's woe is me, whether it's no one works as much as I do. I was up so long last night. Did you hear me say that? I'll say it a little louder so you know I pulled an all-nighter last night, because I'm just a crazy hard worker. I'm better than everybody else here. You can only imagine all the noise that's going on when we do that. All the way to the woe is me, of everything's against me and nothing ever happens for me, or all things happen to me, or whatever the case is. Oftentimes that's not quite as out in the open. Otherwise you don't last long in really good networking groups, because no one wants to be around you. But internally, a lot of this can be going on. Become aware of the things and the logic or the dialogue that we have in our heads that are buying into this victimhood. Because you have two choices: to embrace life and engage it, or to escape and avoid it. Both will try to get things accomplished. One will frustrate you to no end in a vicious cycle where you will commit and jump for it and get frustrated and quit and then feel guilty that you quit and then do it again. The other one will find intrinsic value and motivation in what you do to create real relationships, be aware of where you really are, and to create perpetual success. To be a victor or to be a victim. Because ultimately, when we try and escape and avoid, that becomes one of our last options to rationalize what we accomplished or didn't accomplish as a victim. The last one is far more tricky, and that is the need to be right. We've found, and over 90% of entrepreneurs have a huge challenge with needing to be right. Okay? Okay? We'll get to that. So, we talked about intrinsic, extrinsic, systemic thoughts. Now, needing to be right is all about systemic thoughts. All or nothing, black or white, right or wrong, yes or no. What's interesting about systemic thoughts and why it is so difficult to avoid this challenge of needing to be right is because they're the only thoughts that we can feel. Molecules are actually released in our body, and we feel the ideas that we have when they're systemic. It's not, I need to be right, like a little child. We actually feel a physiological need to be right. And oftentimes we are, okay? And that's a curse on a whole nother scale, because when you need to be right, and you usually are, you're just creating a far more difficult challenge to overcome. Because in building relationships, being right doesn't really matter. In the choices that you make in a business and strategies that you employ, finding the right one can be important, but it's usually far more overrated than your ability to set the need to be right aside and to connect with someone at a deeper level. Because more likely than not, depending on who you're dealing with, a business partner, a child especially, your need to be right will completely blank out and translate the message you're trying to get across anyway, so that they won't even receive it. You may be right, but you might as well be speaking Japanese. They're not going to hear it. You're going to continue to say, if you could just see it from my perspective, you'd understand why I feel so strongly about this. Yeah, I get it, but, and then you go on with your idea. This is a systemic thought process. Someone else in your relationship could have 96% of a good idea, and all you can think about is that 4%. That's it. It will not allow you to see what's good if it's not 100% good and if it's not your idea. That is so tough to set aside. Neuroscientists say it's Herculean in the moment when you're feeling that physiological reaction, those molecules of systemic thought, to step back from that and to override the need to be right. Buttons get pushed that we don't understand. On our assessment, we found that it's oftentimes buttons in our self-esteem that are being pushed. When we feel the need to be right, it is because someone has exposed some level of weakness in our habits of thinking involved with our self-esteem. They're either pushing buttons about our worth or worthiness, they're pushing buttons about our contributions, our abilities, our talents, or they're pushing buttons about our values and what we believe. And the more challenged they are, the more aggressive or passive-aggressive, as we've become all too well at pulling off, our response becomes. And after the dust settles, we don't understand why we got so caught up about the topic. It was just what the movie was called that we went to see last night. Why was I screaming? And it's simple things all the way to very critical, important things, but is a systemically driven physical response to the need to be right. And the reason they hit a nerve was because it challenged something in your self-esteem. Over 96% of people with this measurement cannot separate their self-esteem from their idea. It is inextricably connected. Why does that matter with relationships? Well, one, you want to become aware of you and what kind of parameters, what kind of circumstances the need to be right might be creating as you're building relationships. And it's usually not your problem, because if they could just see it the way you do, it all would make sense, all would be well. But the other is to step outside yourself and also understand that they might be in the same boat. That when they bring an idea to the table and all you can see is the 4% that's wrong, that you're going to be crushing their self-esteem as you respond. As you tell them how different it should be, or only able to focus on the small challenges that you were able to expose and turn into a mountain of challenges, you will be crushing their self-esteem. But you won't feel it, because you will be completely rational and justified that I'm right. I need to make sure they know that I'm right because it's going to help them. Your intentions are in good places, but then they're completely being bulldozed over by the fact that their ideas are attached to their self-esteem, and you are now pushing their idea down and unable to separate that from pushing them down Because when you need to be right, someone else has to be wrong. There's a major challenge in relationships, business and personal. You will want to learn to find good in people's ideas. That is the greatest default in the world. If there's nothing more that you take from this conversation, if you're sitting there going, I don't need to be right. Well, you probably do. Or if you're going, yeah, I do need to be right, then you're probably in the same boat, a little more aware, okay? If you take nothing else from tonight, get into the habit of always starting conversations after someone shares something or you're there to discuss something with what I like about your idea is. If that becomes your default response to the world, the impact that will have in negotiations, in relationships, in business strategies, in everything that you do, in customer acquisition, if you are thinking that way, what I like about your idea is, it completely changes the game. It switches you out of your default, your systemic defaults, and you get to see the other person. You get to see the intrinsic and extrinsic values involved because you're not so stuck in the black and white, yes or no, all or nothing systemic trap that we find ourselves in a need to be right. Those are some of the major challenges that we have in relationships. So, quick review. Agape love. Increase our awareness. Understand that nothing is as it seems. Everyone has a wall of resistance. We've scientifically measured it. On average, 40% of their productivity and cooperation is being withheld from you in a non-adversarial relationship, like a friend, like a family member. Well, that's not necessarily non-adversarial, okay? But friend you're on good terms with, or a family member you're on good terms with. 40% on average is withheld. Become aware of that wall of resistance. Because what we're going to spend the second half of tonight doing is talking about how to recognize that wall, how to bring it down, and how to step into their world to build a foundation for a relationship that will go far deeper and last far longer than any technique out there that you could teach in any type of relationship. And that's going to be when we jump into intrinsic validation. So I believe there is another networking break on the calendar, and my El Capitan run out of the room. So I'm going to step back and allow you guys to jump back into that, and we'll come back and talk about intrinsic validation and a little bit about committed companionships.
Let's do 10 minutes. Get to the bathroom if you need to, get a drink, get some more food, and then come back and make some meals. We'll be back in a minute.
Thank you.
He's really good.
He is. I like him.
would love to go back to my tenure with
It's just like an attorney actually. You guys enjoying? So normally,
It's really good here.
snow part of it.
I don't think I thought about night. How come they don't know?
It's all about salt. It's all about it was a child product.
So where's your party?
You couldn't man up to ask her out, so he like Oh, I got
No, there's one that I saw where the process was crashing. And they cut the thing around.
All right, we're going to get this started back up again because I promised up designs that we'd be through with the networking and everything else by 9 o'clock and doing 8:30. Can I honestly say that I have never been so happy for somebody to be late because of the quality of the messaging? I mean, come on. This guy could be late for my party anytime. I mean, just absolutely fantastic. You guys ready for round two? Okay, bring it on. Thanks, Paul.
You had to rub in I was late again, didn't you?
No! It wasn't your fault. It was the guy that cut you off.
Backhanded compliment.
No.
I'm just kidding. No, thank you. I really appreciate that. Before we dive into the IV, as we call it lovingly, questions, comments, verbal abuse even. I'm open to anything. What are you thinking? Please.
I'm a teacher.
Explain.
Okay, that means that I think we're set on a course when we're born.
Okay.
And we have very little decision-making to actually make.
Okay.
I think what you're calling intrinsic is genetic. Possibly.
Okay.
Then it would be really hard to control, as you said.
Yeah.
Oh, systemic, I'm sorry.
Oh, systemic.
Okay, I'm getting ahead
Okay.
of this. Yeah, but the systemic would be genetic.
Okay.
That we are a product of our family, our parents, their parents, their parents.
Nature nurture thing?
Kind of, yeah. They're finding much more is nature than nurture, you know, now, with the mapping of genes. So I really wonder, I'm sorry, let's finish this, you're right, so how much we really can control it without really hard.
It is. It's very hard. There are a lot of genetic elements to it. I have a cardinal rule of trying to avoid philosophical discussions from the front of the room.
I have a degree in philosophy study.
We're done. Next. Next. I will allow you to beat the crap out of me later. We're not in front of these people. No, but a couple things. One is I wouldn't necessarily disagree with where you're coming from. I think there's a lot of interesting perspectives from where you're coming from. I don't necessarily have anything substantial to argue. Exactly, that's the biggest thing. Is you can't prove either one, and thanks to Google, if you want to, you can, but it's really not proving it. You just kind of support your ideas and try to take them as far down the rabbit hole as you want to go. But what's interesting about systemic thoughts and tying to what you were saying is there are genetic properties to the systemic thoughts that we have, to the environment that we're born in, all the way to those that we were born to have heavy influences over those systemic thoughts. We're not here to shift that, okay? Very similar to what you're talking about, the track we've been set on, who we are, our true selves. We're not here to change that either. We want to make the quality of that determined journey as best that it can be. So rather than argue whether we're determined, whether we make our own destiny, whether nature, nurture, anything like that, when we find the intrinsic value to some of those extrinsic and systemic paths that we're set on, the quality changes incredibly. Now, whether the circumstances we create are any different than they would have been otherwise, you can't really tell. You can't really prove otherwise. All I know is that the clients that we've been working with get into a different place in life. Whether their life would have changed that way anyway.
But you see, if it is determinism, then those people that can and will make the changes, who were determined that they could. So,
Yeah. So, which is a fair point, that everyone who is enjoying my speech tonight was determined to enjoy my speech. It's not your choice. So that's,
they would have
you know,
made the choice to be here.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not really posing an argument to you.
Oh, I didn't take it that way.
Just an idea.
Absolutely.
You know, that's why everyone here that's an entrepreneur, and you don't very often get in a room where that many people raise their hands and say they are. Because if you raise your hand, okay, how many people are risk takers? Do you really consider them risks? Or they just inherent and intrinsic to you, and you just can't do it any other way?
Because risk is really
As an
a perception.
entrepreneur, I don't feel like it's a risk.
Yeah.
What's the worst thing that can happen? Anyway, we're getting off the subject, but yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. It's very different perspectives that we can have on life. At the end of the day, if your perspective allows you to value and see people and engage and embrace and serve, then we're on the same page. Everything under that are different details that can get people to a powerful result either way. So, please.
All right, so I'm more curious about the always being right. The 96 versus 4. Okay, so obviously when you're hiring a coach, or in this case, you want me to talk to him. I'm hiring him because I think he's right. Right? Or it could be right.
Yeah.
So the follow-through question is, with your idea of saying, approaching a subject is I like your idea, rather than I'm right. I'm wondering how your program has evolved over time by engaging 4% and approaching them from other people's ideas.
So first of all, thank you for bringing it up. Second of all, what I want to clarify on a couple levels, if I could, if that's okay, and correct me if I'm wrong along any of this, is systemically, our thought process is one us to ignore or to pay more attention to 4%, to make it as important as the 96%. And we completely eliminate the value that was already there because it doesn't perfectly fit into the box that we've constructed in our mind. Now, the systemic mind will have a really difficult time finding the good because it thinks that it's doing the opposite. It thinks that it's making the 96% 100% and pushing the 4% out of the way. That Ken could be 96% of a great coach for you, but you shouldn't worry about that 4% because it's only about the 96%. That's just a mirrored version of a systemic thought. We're not eliminating either, we're making sure that we can clearly see both. All I was pointing out is the proclivity of going the other direction. That we usually focus on what's wrong and don't look at what's good. I'm not insisting that we should go the other direction and just look at what's good and not see what's wrong. In the assessment that I highly recommend, that whether you think 10 is 96% there or not, that we have 6 related areas that we think about people. And each of them involve assessing the good and assessing the bad and how accurately we can do that on those different dimensions. So as a company, we're not going to come in and say, all right, we should look at the world with rose-colored glasses because that's going to help us connect with people better. We're going to point out that we found in our research that we naturally find the cracks and make them canyons versus being able to clearly see the balance of both. The good and the bad in someone's idea should be seen clearly. If you put your hands up to your head like this so you can see both hands in your peripheral, Most people are going like this, so they can't see this. Or they start to go like this, so they can't see this. We're merely saying we want to create clarity to see both, because both are important. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Did I run off a sidetrack with where you were going? Or?
No, I mean, follow-up question also is, in your own program that you're talking about, how has the 4% developed your program from where you started, what, back in
2000.
to now?
So, in ourselves, being able to find continual improvement is important. That's a really difficult context and connection to create. Because we're talking about building relationships versus the creation of the strategies of our business is kind of what I think you're talking about.
No, not necessarily. I still think it's a relationship building, and if I'm trusting what you're saying, I would like to know where you came from and how you use that formula to come back around where you came from.
Gotcha. One of the ways that we use that is to not indict the world. To not come out and tell everyone what they're doing wrong. We don't want to come out and say, this is wrong, you need to do this differently. We've found ways to bring what we've discovered and what we teach and help infuse it into the way most people currently operate and what they currently believe. I'm not going to use our system to try and change a determinist from believing that that should be what she believes, because unless it's causing damage, unless it's causing problems that she doesn't want to be dealing with in her life, there's no reason to do that if it's not creating any harm. And so if we got focused in on the 4% of that idea that just doesn't work, then we're going to create problems all over the place, and we'll create more enemies and we'll create friends. We spent 15 years building a company without a marketing budget because we found a clear way of being able to see both and acknowledging both without needing to be right about one or the other. That makes sense? Yep. We've built everything that we have as an organization off of relationships and not needing to be right, which is far easier to do when your way or the highway, which can only last so long. So, thank you. Anyone else? Please.
I'm kind of going to down south.
Oh, great. I'm scared.
I think I'm almost the opposite, to be honest. And as I've been listening to all of this, I think one of the confusing parts for me is I think that when I was younger, I was probably a lot more intrinsic. And as I'm getting older, I'm becoming more systemic. And, through processes of life and failure and success and whatever, I think it's getting more difficult to, be able to come from that place and to be authentic. So I guess that's my question. How do you get rid of the noise? How do you get rid of all the garbage that lies slowly so that if you're distilling down these ideas, I'm sitting here going, okay, am I going to take this quiz? And is it going to, what's it going to tell me? I mean, how do you distill that idea?
First of all, it won't tell you what's wrong with you, because there's nothing wrong with you, okay? It's going to measure your thought process and show you where the noise is. This is not an academic assessment. You're not looking to get a passing grade, okay? That's a big part of it. Second of all, it's not measuring you, it's measuring your thoughts. Those are not you.
Right, and I guess that's my question. If your thoughts are a result of your life experiences, how do you get down to those core beliefs that are driving you when you have all these other thoughts that have come as a result of life?
That's what we want to discover, is how have the experiences of your life shaped and molded your thinking habits, your thought patterns? Where is the noise coming from? Where's the pressure points? Where are some tremendous gifts that you could use differently? Because at some point in your life, and in a lot of our lives, that intrinsic value, possibility, turned into expectations. And when that possibilities are now expectations, they take on a completely different pressure, completely different result, and a completely different taxing of who we are and how we can show up. What we want to see is as those expectations transform, and as they were influenced, because your thought processes have been learning far more than you. They never sleep, okay? when you're drifting off thinking about something else, they're still there being influenced by whatever's going on around you. Whatever people are telling you or not telling you, whatever you're experiencing or not experiencing, is shaping your habits of thinking. And we want to become aware of those things so we can see where some of those triggers were along the way. Did we fall into a vicious cycle of fantasy, where we used an amazing gift of being able to visualize what was possible for our lives, but then we started stepping into what it would be like when, rather than learning to be inspired of what we need to do right now. Or we started using that gift to catastrophize and play out the worst case scenario, so the only joy we found in life were when the worst case scenario didn't happen and the relief that provided. We want to see where some of those pressure points are. Where did your expectations get so over-focused that it was never good enough? And you had to find a way to build that mental construct you built in your mind, or you failed, or got burned out because of those expectations, or started getting hesitant about the big decisions you were making, whether you had the competency to follow through, or whether you should have all your eggs in one basket. Understanding whether the challenges or the joy in your life have everything to do with your circumstances or nothing to do with your circumstances. Whether they're actually a perspective of wondering whether you sit there, how much of your time are you spending wishing you had something different, or wishing things had happened differently, or not finding fulfillment in what you're investing your time and your attention into and your energy, or whether it's making you busier and busier and busier and feeling less and less productive, or whether you're connecting with people, but they're not necessarily connecting with you because of what's going on in that area of your assessment, where you can feel them, but they're not necessarily feeling you, and we may not even be aware of it, all the way to getting impatient and feeling like we need to do everything ourselves to get them done right, to obsessively, constantly thinking about new and better ways to do things, to resisting imposed structure, to having issues with authority because we don't like to be told what to do. We value contribution, not title. I mean, we want to find all these pressure points. What is resulting in the possibility of your life when you were younger of being able to use that gift, that metacognitive gift, to see potential that turned into challenge and expectation, and for some of us, torture, and how we've learned to compensate for those challenges of what's really going on the inside. It's difficult to understand on this side. We have an experiential product that you've got to do it, to get it. But more than likely, when you take it and you have an opportunity to go through it, you'll be wondering, how do they know that? Unfortunately, we don't. Math does. It's all mathematics. It's completely objective. It's the only reason the tool is as effective as it is. There's no normative evaluation. There's no committee deciding what order the things are supposed to be ranked in, or the quality of the results, or anything like that. It's completely mathematical. It is an incredible opportunity to understand how those things transform, so that when we start working with groups or coaches, and there may be an opportunity for Ken to come back with the group and actually have everyone take an assessment and talk to the group based on the trends of all of your thought processes. That is what we decided to do in 2002. Rather than just teach principles that we hope could fit people, we want to find out what was really going on so we could teach principles that actually shifted people, that actually allowed them to change the way they were showing up. Because the Nike philosophy has a terrible rate of attrition. Just do it. How successful has that worked for most of the population in this life?
Startup world, about 3.7%.
Ouch. Okay? Because the path to becoming requires completely different level of awareness and principles that actually drive that transformation rather than perpetuate the problem. We actually found some of the principles we were teaching, and what a lot of pundits out there are teaching, can actually do more harm than good. Some of them if it's just taught in the wrong context, but some of them can create real challenges depending on where your pressure points are. So if you do take it, don't take it personally, okay? It's your thoughts, okay? It can get really personal, but don't take it personally.
Knowing that going in.
Because the results that you get were going to happen no matter what you did, right? I know, but I knew that was going to happen anyway, so that's why I threw the comment in. Yes. Oh, I thought your hand raised.
No.
Maybe it should have. I'm just kidding.
I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you. There's one person. Perfect. Oh, two. Sorry, you said it. Yes. All right. I need self-validation. I have major. We talk about self-esteem challenges. I need this. I need this. Oh, yeah, for sure. All right. Perfect. Thank you. Yes, David Bowie.
So, therefore, do our thoughts define us, or do we define ourselves?
Ooh, Og Mandino talked about that. Strong is he or she that allows or makes his actions control their thoughts. And weak are they that allow their thoughts to control their actions. So, ask your question again.
Do we control our actions, or do our actions control us?
That is up to you. One of them is far more difficult to do, but it is the path to creating a new habit, what neuroscientists would call synaptic pruning. Because we identify those thought processes, it takes a lot of time, focus, density focus is what neuroscientists call it, to be able to synaptically prune those habits. It becomes a different scenario, a different playground when we understand the way we show up, our defaults, are actual neural processes in our brain. But neuroplasticity has been one of the greatest discoveries made in the last decade or
Well,
two.
you explained earlier, the reactive thought that you had when you were cut off. I mean, that's a behavioral reaction that takes a lot of discipline to pull yourself away from it, to look at that instead of running that person over. No, I mean.
Well, and to back up, what was your name again? I called Judy. To back up Judy, okay, there are elements to that reaction that you could say are genetic. It's just, I'm predisposed to react that way. When we're talking about these shifts and these synaptic processes, we're talking about becoming more aware of it sooner, being able to manage the collateral damage it could create, becoming more aware of that default reaction. There are some things we're human, you're never going to be able to eliminate. But becoming more aware of them and building the habits that can safeguard some of the challenges we'll create for ourselves, how we perpetuate some of those problems, are sometimes the best that we can do, but certainly better than the alternative. But systemic thoughts will want you to say either you can control your thoughts or you can't. Your actions control them, or your thoughts control your actions. There's only one or the other. It can't be both. And on any given day, it's going to be both. You're going to have days that you wake up inspired. You're going to have a lot of days you wake up and you need to go get inspired. You're going to want to act to create that inspiration. There'll be some days you wake up and you don't need to be inspired to act. You're just ready to go.
Or you just have to keep a notebook by your bed and you wake up at 3 a.m. Have an idea and need to write it down.
Absolutely. Having an outlet is very important.
Either that or a laptop, an iPad, a phone.
I'm still a pen and paper kind of person, for sure. Especially with how many iPads I've had go bye-bye. Picture of 3 little girls I showed you guys at the beginning. Yeah, they're iPad destroyers. Anyway, so I hope that helps. So it's a matter of creating clarity, which, as Robert Hartman found, was a matter of clear perspectives on both sides. For example, judging a book by its cover. It's like
an internal compromise.
Now, compromise can sound, yeah, I guess it could be.
Not a derogatory way.
Yeah.
Balancing it out by looking at it one way and removing yourself and trying to look at it from a different perspective.
Balance being the key word. Absolutely. 100% having balance. And in every thought process, we're constantly on one of those surfer wheels and making sure, and sometimes we can drift off and we forget that we lose our equilibrium and all of a sudden we're all the way over here. What we want to discover is how many of those are circumstantial, have certain triggers, which ones have been deeply rooted habitually in the way that we think, and whether they're serving us or not. Because there's some things that can be major risks in our assessment that are actually tremendous gifts that you'll want to utilize, but they can be like a fire hose pointed in the right direction. They're amazing, or in the wrong direction, they are so destructive. But you don't want to look at just cutting off the water supply to the water hose, the fire hose. You want to learn how to direct it. Exactly. Perfect. All right. We're going to jump into intrinsic validation. Okay? So, there are 5 steps to intrinsic validation. Warning. Don't jump into the steps so much as using them as a guide to become an intrinsic validator. Okay? Much deeper level to the implementation of the habits you'll want to have around intrinsic validation. The first step to intrinsic validation, to connecting with people, is to notice others. This ties into agape love, into a heightened sense of awareness. Being able to see things going on out there, because as we said, we found it's not as much a challenge of empathy or compassion to connect with other people. It's the noise going on that can prevent us from utilizing some of those powerful gifts. As we learn to quiet the noise and show up for someone else, we'll start to see things that we didn't see before. And we'll want to have the courage to act on them. With major challenges in our self-esteem comes major questions on the impressions we receive in life. Don't need to raise your hand, but how many of you have ever felt impressed to say something to someone and you didn't? Or to go up and talk to someone and you didn't? That's some of the noise that's going on. And it's learning to trust your intuition and starting by noticing others. Notice things that you may not have noticed before, especially if your mind was somewhere else. And you start listening for doors. You don't walk up and say, "Hey, how you doing?" Just to expect "I'm good. You? I'm good. See you later." You start actually seeing the person in front of you. "How you doing?" "I'm good." "Are you?" "Yeah." "Awesome. Tell me more about that." And you start listening for keys. You start listening for doors to open as you notice people. Now, Dave, my father, writes about a great example of this in his book, where he was in a cab in New York, and they were on their way to a restaurant. And as the cab driver, as the lady that picked them up was driving, my father noticed that she had some very intricate tattoos on her forearm. Okay? And he's not a fan of tattoos at all. And however, he wanted to notice what was important to her. That being a key distinguishing factor, that it's not just noticing, it's noticing what's important to someone else, regardless of whether it's important to you or not. This is not about you. Relationships, connecting with other people, is not about you. It is about them. What's amazing, though, is you trust that process. You will learn more about you and substantiate your own self-esteem and your own confidence better than anything else when you make it all about them. When you notice what's important to them. So he noticed these tattoos and said, "Hey, tell me about your tattoos." And this somewhat rough taxi driver lady just lit up, turned into someone completely different, because he touched on something that was important to her. And he didn't just let her spout off and then say, "Great, thanks, appreciate that. Anyway, so going to dinner tonight." He listened for doors, and he noticed, because he was being safe. It's one thing to ask a question or to notice. It's another to be safe enough to receive what you ask for. To allow that person to feel like you actually care. That you're not there to judge them. You're not there to impress them. You are there to connect as an empty vessel, to show up for them and to be safe. Because one of the challenges that we have, for those of us that are very entrepreneurial and very high-level obsessive thinkers, is we feel that the gift we have to give people is our advice. And that the gift we have to give people is our counsel. The greatest gift we can give someone else is to help them feel understood. When someone feels understood, that wall of resistance comes down. That productivity and cooperation comes pouring out, and guess who gets to be the beneficiary? You. You get the opportunity to give the greatest gift of them feeling understood when you are safe. What is being safe? It is being present. It's not thinking about the next appointment you have, the next phone call you need to make, the fight you had last night. You are there and you are safe and you care. You show up for that person, and then you create a safe place. Now, this is different from being safe. Being safe is how you show up. Creating a safe place is what you do once you get there. Now, rather than advise or counsel, which you may have merit for, you may have things that they need to hear, don't go there. Create a safe place by asking empathetic and intuitive questions. What questions do you ask? Well, find out who they are. Try to understand them. And if you're doing that appropriately, the questions will come. You'll pick up on things as they're talking that you wouldn't have otherwise. Why? Because you're not waiting for the opportunity to respond. You are actually listening. A lot of people listen to respond, and a lot of us don't even realize how much we're doing it until we commit to sitting in front of someone, engaging them, and listening without responding. The only things you're allowed to say are, tell me more about that. Would you mind sharing more? And thank you so much for sharing that. That's it. You're not allowed to respond to anything. You are listening. And you start to partner with silence early on. Become very aware of how programmed we are for programmed responses. And sometimes as you start to connect with people, as you start to intrinsically validate them, there will be opportunities for you to go, especially if it's on the phone, I'm just listening. Why? Because they just said, are you still there? Yeah, I'm just listening. And then you'll see people kind of downshift into a different gear, and they get out of that comfort zone of programmed responses and of how much did they really want to hear, and they feel understood, and they'll share more. And you'll create relationships on a level that is unbelievable. It can be really hard to do because we can have all kind of rationalizations, all kind of intentions that can seep into the conversation. Someone's talking about, yeah, we were scuba diving in Hawaii and we saw this shark, and we immediately thought of that opportunity that we were surfing at San Diego and we thought we saw a shark too. I can't wait to throw that in there because it's going to show that I can relate to them. That's not creating a safe place. Okay? And it could be tough to do that in the moment, but be safe and then create a safe place by asking questions. And trust the fact that if you show up clear and present for them and focused on them, you won't have to worry about what questions to ask. You may think that going in, I don't even know what questions I would ask. Well, because it's hard to think of questions when you're thinking of how to respond and you're not even listening to what's actually being said. Even paying attention to the littlest things. Okay? Like one of the more powerful things that you shared was when you talked about your state of mind when you were younger. That hit me. I grabbed onto that immediately because I thought that was more profound than anything else that you shared. And I wanted to ask questions that would follow up about what that was like, what shifted, what changed. And in a coaching environment, we would certainly go there, an opportunity to build a relationship, just sitting down, of giving you a safe place to be able to just speak about that openly, to explore those things and to notice doors and open them. We're not usually bad if we're great at building relationships or networking, at opening doors, okay? We have this big hallway and we can talk to someone and say, so tell me about you. Oh, you got kids? That's great. How old are they? Oh, awesome. Anyway, oh, how long have you been married? Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Oh, you work at this place, so what do you do there? Awesome. We open doors. We go all the way down the hallway. Did we ever take the opportunity to open the door and walk in and see what it's like in here? Stick right there with that door that you opened, that you felt you impressed to ask them about, and see what comes up. See what you start seeing in other people or noticing that you didn't notice before. You'll have tremendous conversations. Sometimes, as a disclaimer, people will share things with you that they shouldn't be sharing with you. It's very important to stay safe in those positions because they are feeling, and probably for the first time, or at least the first time in a long time, they are feeling understood. When you first start to intrinsically validate like this, when you show up with a heightened sense of awareness and you trust your impressions, it can feel like it takes a long time to intrinsically validate someone. We just got to get to the point. We've got to move on. This is all about business. You'll get there. But understand, you're learning to drive stick shift for the first time. Grind some gears. It'll feel far less effective than just having to worry about a gas and a brake. But when it becomes habit, when you become an intrinsic validator, the payoff is enormous. You become a beneficiary of their cooperation and their productivity because they feel understood. And you can duplicate that over and over and over again, and you can start to hone in the clarity and the direction of those conversations as well. So that you're not showing up to a board meeting and saying, so tell me about your life. You know, it's not a matter of broad context, but it's a matter of the process and actually embodying those things that are important. So you become aware of them, you become aware of their wall of resistance that we've talked about, and you ask them questions. Why? Because you're looking for a way into the wall. What are most people's reaction to the wall? Well, they either they throw up all their information, their advice, and their counsel, the opportunity that they have, whatever the case is, or they grab a sledgehammer and they just run into that thing as hard as they can. Og talks about it in Scroll 2 when he said, muscle can split a shield and even destroy life. But only the unseen power of love can reach their hearts. The reason you're noticing what's important to them is to find a way in through that wall of resistance. And then you walk in and ask them about it some more and tell me more about that. And does that ever show up for you this way? And have you ever felt this way? Oh, that's so amazing. And you're creating a safe place and you're in. Not so that you can immediately sneak your agenda in and now you can present, now you can advise, now you can counsel, now you can tell them about this great opportunity that you have. No one talks about opportunities in Utah though. Because now you're in their world. And there is a responsibility to being in their world, to be safe and to create a safe place. And if the opportunity intuitively arises for a new moment of decision, for example, if you were there for a reason, show up to connect first. And then when you're in their world, when you stepped in their world, ask for permission to bring them into yours. It's a subtle little thing. I used to watch my father do it all the time, and I never understood why. He would always ask for permission to share anything with anyone in a conversation. Would you mind if I shared something about X, Y, and Z? And it's usually had something to do with the conversation that was happening. It was so subtle, it was so little, sometimes even annoying, but it was so important because he understood where he was. He was in someone's world, and his agenda had no place in that world. His objectives, this was their world. And in a new moment of decision, he asked for permission to bring them into his. Because here is where they can actually understand what you're trying to tell them. They can actually understand why you're there. Because now the wall of resistance is down, and now the cooperation and productivity can pour out. And if they don't accept your invitation, then don't try and pull them into your world. The wall will go right up and chop your arm off when you're trying to do that. And if your intuition says now is not the time, then wait. Okay? The reason you invited them to lunch may not be what you were supposed to talk to them about. But you're not going to find that out until you step into their world and you show up safe to help them feel understood. You invite them into your world. They come. You start to tell them, and that's when you find an opportunity to gain agreement. But now you're operating on a completely different level than you were before. Everyone wants to just get right to the agreement. The unfortunate thing is if you skip any of these steps, you're going to need a tactic or a technique to do it. You're going to need to close them. You're going to have a line. You're going to have to be able to manipulate something if you skip these steps. There's no way to pull it off otherwise. And then unfortunately, the time that you would have wanted to take to intrinsically validate them, you spend maintaining the relationship and trying to fill in holes and gaps and trying to correct expectations later on because you didn't take the opportunity to step into their world and to notice them and to be safe and to ask empathetic questions in the process. Those are the steps of intrinsic validation. My challenge to all of you, and this is a tough one, is if twofold. One, if you feel that there may be a possibility that you need to be right in your relationships, any of them, personal, business, find someone that has been involved with you in that relationship in your need to be right, whether it's a business partner, a spouse, a child, anyone, a friend. And my challenge to you is to find them and to have one of the most eye-opening conversations that you may ever have. And part of that is going to be because you're going to do hardly any of the talking. and lovingly approach them, sit down privately, and ask them one question. What has it been like to be in a relationship with someone who needs to be right? And guess what you do after that? Quiet. And just listen. They'll say, well, are you setting me up for something? There might be some skepticism. It might take some time to ease into this. The only things you're allowed to say are, tell me more about that. Would you mind sharing more? And thank you so much for sharing that. I'll be working on it. That's all you're allowed to say. And just listen. I've had clients do this with their 9-year-olds. I've had plenty of clients do this with their spouses. I've had clients do this with their business partners. Everything. And if you show up in the right space, ready to cut off those systemic thoughts and just be there and listen, everything in you will want to explain and justify, even apologize that they didn't understand you all this time. I'm so sorry you thought that that's what I was trying to do. We'll want to do all those things. And it may not, if it's not difficult in the moment, it'll be really difficult the next day. I got to tell them, they just didn't get it. They didn't understand my intentions. Oh my gosh, I just need to let them know. I'm so sorry that you thought it was that for that reason or for whatever. And don't do it. Your only responses forever are, tell me more about that. Thank you so much for sharing. I'll be working on that. Or would you mind sharing more? For that conversation, whether it's in the moment, the next day, a week later, that's all you get to say.
And the question is, can you tell me what it felt like to be in a relationship with someone that always felt the need to be right?
Can I?
No, that's the question.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I can tell you. Because I had that conversation. And my wife's response was, I don't know if I can ever love you again. And I thought it was over. It was the worst day of my life. Because I became painstakingly aware of an instant what she had been dealing with for years. Now, not all of you will have that extreme of an experience, but I hope it will be as extreme in how transformational it can be to become aware of the way we show up. Because systemically, our intentions can hide what's actually being received, our perception of what's actually being received so well. Especially with spouses and children, for whatever reason. We feel like we're just taking care of them, or they need to hear this, or it's going to help them. And we run them over in the process time and time and time again. We do it in all relationships. At least people like me do. And a lot of clients that we've worked with. About 55,000 of them. Okay?
So we're not alone?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that's a big thing to realize, that that's not you. Becoming aware of those things and those thoughts and being able to show up for them and be safe, that's you. So have that conversation, okay? If you don't feel like that's an issue, still have the conversation, okay? However, the other alternative is also find an opportunity to engage with someone over the next week and with the same rules. Not asking them what it's like to be right, but engage with them the same way you would in a networking session, if you went to lunch with someone, and that's all you get to say. Tell me more about that. Would you mind sharing more? And thank you so much for sharing. Try having a conversation, and that is the extent of your dialogue. And you're going to discover two things. One, you'll discover what people start to share with you and how they open up and those walls of resistance come down. Two, you're going to hear all that noise going on when you can't reply, and you can't respond, and you can't counsel and advise. And it's not about you anymore. And you get to hear all that dialogue that shows up when it's not about you anymore, that we're not always aware of. Okay? So those are my two challenges. This is intrinsic validation. Now, last thing, talking about the ultimate relationship. And whether that's marriage, we're just going to call it, for sake of tonight, a committed companionship. Okay? It was mentioned, that's why I wanted to bring this up, it was mentioned on the agenda. Our company, primarily my father, hosts retreats. About 8 years into this thing, we realized, after working at that point with about 40,000 different clients, measuring their thought processes, working with them closely for being able to understand them at a different level and transform them, we realized that a lot of people were struggling in their closest relationships, their committed companionships. And about that same time, he was looking for a cabin in Bear Lake to replace the 3-bedroom condo he's trying to fit all 7 of his children and their children in. And he found the cabin. It was quite a divine intervention, if you will, if I can use that. And it became a sanctuary for his clients and their relationships, a place to bring them away from their lives, away from all the noise, and get back to the reason they were there. If this applies to you, then I hope that you can feel the message. If it doesn't, thank you for allowing us to share it. Please take home with you everything else that we've talked about that does apply. But at the core of that ultimate relationship, and any relationship, is commitment and trust. You create the relationships by noticing what's important to them, by being safe, creating a safe place, and then if needed, gaining agreement for what you can offer to assist them, whether that's a service, counsel, advice, whether it's parental or business or whatever the case is, and then creating a new moment of decision, but using your clear empathy and intuition to do that, and chopping and cutting out the noise. Then moving forward, it is total commitment and total trust, and cutting out the noise that can get in the way of that. So I wanted to give everyone a quick glimpse of that event and what we do, just in case there's someone here that's supposed to be in one of the next ones. We can't get the sound to work. We're all going to huddle around Jill's computer and listen.
Try it again, Paul.
That's on. Nope. Nope. Something turned on.
Well, we've got a small enough group that after you finish, we can just bring it up over here and I'll take it out of the HD and
Okay.
show it here. And,
Yeah.
and do you have a link to this on the YouTube that I could put up on the meetup link as well?
Sure.
And I can do that as well.
I can actually do that to you right now. It's just to the site, so it'll have the same video on it.
Okay, perfect.
Great. So they're a 4-day retreat up at Dave's cabin in Bear Lake. Every couple gets their own master suite. There's 7 of them up there. So between Dave and the couples, there's actually an extra one that it's kind of a Jack and Jill. It's usually reserved for couples that want to go but don't necessarily want to go together. So it's come in handy a few times. Usually, circumstances change by the end of the event. But it's 4 days. It's an opportunity to spend one-on-one coaching time with Dave. It's an opportunity to have some wonderful adventures. In the winter times, we go on some snowmobile outings. One of the nights, Friday night, I believe, all the women stay at the cabin to get pampered by a masseuse and an esthetician, while the guys go on an all-night snowmobile ride, get back around 2 or 3 a.m. The point of that is to ride up to the top of the mountains and create a bonfire. Talk about the way that trust can be damaged in a relationship, and then their better half gets to stay back at the cabin and talk about what's important to them while getting pampered. There's jacuzzi up there, there's air hockey, there's ping pong, there's fires and theaters, and it's an incredible oasis to get away, but that's not the topic. The topic is really your relationship, an opportunity to really get back to the core of what started that companionship and the core of commitment and trust. Now, with that said, it is not necessarily a place just for broken relationships. We have some that are very splintered, and healing occurs. We have a lot of couples who show up who are in a great place. They just want to make sure it continues to progress and gets to the next level. So don't assume this is not couples therapy. There are no airing your dirty laundry out in front of a group because you need to be able to share that stuff. None of that happens with the group. Principles are taught to the group. All of that happens in coaching if needed. but the experience of bringing you back to the core of commitment and trust it's indescribable. It's very difficult to explain, very similar to the assessment experience until you've actually experienced it. We've had over 120 couples up at that cabin, and every one of them have come back saying that it was one of the greatest experiences of their lives. So I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that I was aware, but regardless, in building relationships, become more aware of yourself, become more aware of what's important to them, be safe, create a safe place, find an opportunity to give them the greatest gift that there is, to feel understood, and trust that regardless of the noise that might be going on in your head otherwise, of you need to get right to the point and they've got to hear this and whatever the case is, and trust it, because a sage once said that it is the greatest secret of success in all ventures, that without it we are no more than peddlers in the marketplace. Avoid the peddling, find that awareness, connect with people, and build relationships. You will not only see a rapid transformation in the quality of your relationships, but even in the material conditions of your life when you become that kind of person, rather than just try to do those things that would get you what you want. Thank you so much for the time tonight. I appreciate being with you, and I hope to be with you again.
One thing to add on if you wrote down the link that Paul had up there, you need my last name on there?
Oh, is it not just Ken?
No.
Oh, it's in my system. It's just Ken.
It's a dead link.
Oh, I bet.
So add Sharrar if you need it. I put it on some cards, but Sharrar, right, Paul?
You got it.
Sharrar. I've got cards if you need one. That have it. Thanks.
Thanks for Sharraring the link. Just an easy way to remember. All right, great. Thanks, everybody.
So if we have the opportunity, do you think we want to have Paul back sometime?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a given. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Coach, I see. It's Coach Intentional Creation. Coach Intentional Creation. Where? I'm in the, it's in Jacob Park, Edenville. My business park. The name of the, I'm in a co-working space. I don't know where Instinct is. Oh, no, it's further south. 45th is,
Oh, my pleasure.
yeah, further south.
Thank you so much.
Right by the, there's we're right next to Chetwell. There's a lot being developed now, but now we can see. I know. A lot of construction going on. Yep. Lot. 1,300 under construction.
Thank you.
The next 10 years.
I'll lock that one away.
Very nice to meet you. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. You'll be on your way.
Are you a hunter? She's a terminating hunter. Oh, terminating.
The last few days.
Always right, right?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was awesome. Very cool.
Hey, we'll see you, okay? Yeah.
See you. I'll call you. I'll call you.